He was slow as a child. He didn't speak until he was 4 years old. He struggled so much in school that his teachers called him lazy and weird. And when he wanted to go to university, he failed his entrance exam on the first try. That wasn't even the beginning of his problems. But in spite of everything, he became one of the most important scientists of all time. This is the incredible story of Albert Einstein. Our story begins in Germany in 1879. Albert was born into an ordinary family. His parents weren't rich or well-educated, but they were kind and loving people who wanted the best for their little boy. From the moment he was born, it was clear that Albert was different. As a baby, he didn't talk like other kids. In fact, he hardly made any sounds at all. So all he did was stare intensely at the world around him. His parents were worried, so they took him to see a doctor. The doctor examined Albert and told his parents not to worry. He said Albert was just a little slow, but that would change as he got older. So Albert's parents took him home and waited for him to start talking. But month after month went by, and still there was no sign of speech. By the time Albert turned 4 years old, he still hadn't said a single word. It was only then that Albert suddenly started to talk, but not before telling his mother, "Don't worry, I'll make up for the lost time." Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And true to his word, Albert started to learn new things very quickly. However, this sudden development came as a shock to everyone, especially his teachers, who had no idea why a kid who had been so silent suddenly started talking and performing at the level of an 8-year-old. As Albert grew up, he always seemed to be a step behind his peers. He didn't run as fast as them, jump as high, or throw a ball as far. Even simple tasks that other children learned easily, such as tying his shoes, were incredibly difficult for Albert. These days, we know that Albert probably had dyscalculia, which makes it hard to learn math. Because of this, Albert didn't do well at school. His classmates mocked him for being so slow, and even his teachers thought he was lazy. One day, Albert's teacher stood up on his desk and asked the class, "Who will tell me what the other day?" Most of the students raised their hands, but Albert remained silent. After class, the teacher pulled Albert aside and said, "Why don't you try harder? You might be slow, but you're not stupid." Albert looked up at his teacher and replied, "It's not that I don't want to learn. It's just that I can't. My brain doesn't work that way." Sadly, Albert's teacher didn't understand what Albert was trying to say, so he continued to punish him for being slow and unmotivated. Albert tried his hardest, but he couldn't learn as quickly as his classmates. So his grades remained poor throughout elementary school. At age 15, Albert decided to take the entrance exam for university, but he failed. Again, he was too slow compared to the other students. For the next 2 years, Albert studied hard and took the exam again, but once again he failed. Now that he was 17 years old, Albert knew he needed a plan, so he spent a year thinking about his future. In the end, he decided to enroll in a Swiss university. This time he studied physics and mathematics, but it was very hard for him. Albert was still too slow to solve equations and perform experiments like the other students, so his professors gave him a nickname, the Swabian. They also warned him that if he didn't improve, he would never get a job. Albert tried his hardest, but he simply could not compete with the other students. When he graduated, he received a degree, but it was nothing more than a piece of paper saying he'd studied there. It didn't mean he knew anything about physics or math. Albert's plan was to become a professor, but without good grades, no one would hire him. So he had only one option left. He needed to find a job that didn't require a degree. That's when he heard about a job opening at a patent office. Albert applied and was hired on the spot. Even though he was a highly educated physicist, Albert now had to examine patents for new inventions. All day long, he looked through drawings of gadgets and wrote down technical descriptions. On the surface, it may seem boring, but Albert actually loved it. Every day he learned something new, and he was paid for doing it. Plus, this job gave him free time to study whatever he wanted. So, although Albert was only making $26 a month, he was happy. However, not everyone was happy for him. Around this time, Germany had become a dangerous place for Jews. Leaders like Adolf Hitler were blaming Jews for Germany's economic problems, and as a Jew himself, Albert was in danger. He tried to ignore what was happening, but in 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Soon after, Albert's life was in danger, so he fled to the United States. In America, Albert's life was completely turned upside down. He was now in a new country without any friends or family. But this didn't bother him because he had a big dream. He wanted to discover the secrets of the universe. Once again, Albert found a job that allowed him to study during his free time. This time he worked at a university, but not as a professor. He was hired as an assistant, which meant he didn't have to teach. Instead, he could spend all his time researching. And that's exactly what he did. Over the next few years, he wrote many papers and became friends with other scientists. But no one had any idea how important those papers were. Today, we know that those papers were about special relativity and the equivalence of mass and energy. That's right. The theory of relativity and the equation E equals mc squared were discovered by a low-paid assistant working at a university. But that wasn't the end of his discoveries. Although Albert was now a successful scientist, his personal life was a mess. He divorced his first wife and saw her again only once, briefly. Albert was also estranged from one of his sons. And on top of all that, Albert was still lonely. No matter where he went, he always felt alone. In a letter to his friend, Albert wrote, "I feel like a beetle. My whole life is falling to pieces around me, and I am looking for a new place to crawl into. But despite all the problems, Albert kept working. In 1939, he made another groundbreaking discovery. This time, it was the equivalence of mass and energy. Albert described this in his famous equation, E equals mc squared, which means that mass and energy are interchangeable. But Albert didn't stop there. He realized that if a tiny amount of mass could be converted into a huge amount of energy, then the opposite must also be true. If energy could be converted into mass, then it would be possible to create an atom bomb. Albert immediately shared his discovery with President Roosevelt, warning him about the dangers of nuclear weapons. But sadly, the president didn't take any action. 4 years later, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, ending World War II. Although Albert had tried to warn the world, many people blamed him for helping to create the bomb. After the war ended, Albert traveled all over the world, meeting with world leaders and trying to prevent another war. But in the end, he failed. At age 75, Albert suffered a serious health scare. Doctors told him he might die at any moment. So Albert took some time off to think about his life. As he looked back, he realized that he had done a lot of good things, but also a lot of bad. He helped reveal the secrets of the universe, but he also helped create the atomic bomb. And as he thought about his future, he knew he might die alone, but that didn't bother him. He had spent his entire life searching for answers about the universe, and had found some of them. The rest didn't matter. On April 18, 1955, Albert Einstein died. He was alone in his room, but millions of people around the world mourned his death. The genius physicist had changed our understanding of the universe forever. But that's not all. Albert Einstein also taught us many important life lessons. He showed us that curiosity can lead to amazing discoveries. He showed us that it's okay to be different and that we should never give up, no matter how big the challenge is. Today, Albert Einstein is remembered as a symbol of human curiosity, peace, and genius. Now, it's time for you to tell me, what did you admire most about Albert Einstein? And why do you think he's still remembered today? Either way, thanks for watching and see you next time.